Hi everyone, my name's James. I'm a partner at Seraphim Capital, a venture fund here in London, and I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what the two previous speakers have talked about, and actually try and give you a bit of an insight into the murky world of being a VC, and how that relates to all of the exciting developments in the space sector, which we've been hearing about. So just very briefly about my fund. To bastardize a JFK quote, we like to do things not because they're easy, because they're hard. What does that mean? It means we tend to look to invest into IT-led businesses, tend to invest more into B2B rather than B2C companies, and we're very patient. So you can see that by virtue of the fact that our first fund was launched 10 years ago, and if you can all keep your fingers crossed, we're launching our new fund, which is focused on space tech, later this week. So a little bit about myself. I'm a dyslexic historian, so not your classic venture background. I've been involved in the startup and innovation community here in London since 2000. I'm a very proud, twice failed entrepreneur, so I've learned a lot of very hard lessons firsthand, which hopefully I try and help some of the companies I invest in to avoid. And I've been a VC here in London since 2006. And unlike most VCs, I really don't like social media, and I'm not afraid to tell people about it. That's mainly because most people, myself included, are plenty narcissistic enough without all the distractions of social media. I am, however, pro the singularity, and just another show of hands. How many people in this room are familiar with the concept of the singularity, aka Pete's Raptor? Excellent, that is more than I expected. Okay. So, for those who aren't familiar, and don't worry, this will all make sense in terms of talking about space in due course. What is the singularity? And this is playing to my background of being a historian, but essentially, as a human, we tend to see history and development in a linear fashion, and as a consequence, it can be extremely difficult to get a sense of the pace of change. Either you're at a very early stage in any development curve, at which point it's imperceptible that you are actually accelerating, or you're at the other end, past the knee of the curve, where everything is accelerating so quickly that it's effectively imperceptible to you. Now, what a whole range of people over the last 20 to 30 years have been arguing is that if you start to look at both technological and biological evolution as a continuum and on a logarithmic basis, you can see that since the dawn of time, we've been following a very clear pattern of progress, which follows the law of accelerating returns, namely that every next stage of that evolution is happening at an ever greater pace. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that people like Ray Kurzweil, go check him out if you haven't heard of him, are predicting that if you extrapolate on the current rate of progress by Moore's law and a whole range of other things, at some point in potentially the next 30 years, so within all of our lifetimes, we will get to a point where artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence. And then in combination with the grid technologies of genetics, robotics, IT, and nanotechnology, we will arrive at the singularity. And what that means is there is a merging of the physical and the machine, the virtual and the real, at which point intelligence ripples out across the universe and no one's got a fucking clue what happens at that point. So again, how does this all relate to space? Well, I want to now move on, having given you kind of a bit of an idea about how technology evolves, to now give you a bit of an insight into how VCs think, and for anyone who's an entrepreneur out there, how you have to think in terms of approaching VCs and looking to build a business. So for everyone out there, I'm afraid we're not the 99%, and I'm going to sound like a very elitist VC here. Being a venture capitalist, it's all about 0.1%, and I'll come on to explain what that means. But keep in mind the 1 in 1,000 metric. So, contrary to many beliefs, being a VC is actually quite tough. And one of the reasons for that is that success is extremely rare and tends to be very binary. So, what you can see here on the chart on the left is that actually 1 in 2, on average, of all investments that a VC makes fails. And that actually it's only 1 in 10 that is a major success. So what that means is, in my job as a VC, is if I don't find that 1 in 10 businesses that I invest in, my fund fails and I have no career and I can't carry on investing into companies. A typical VC will maybe invest in a handful of companies every year, for which they will have seen hundreds, if not thousands of opportunities. So even to get investment, you're in the top 1%. And to be the one success in 10, that puts you in the top 0.1%. Hence, the 1 in 1,000 metrics. So, standing out from the crowd can be extremely tough, and that is the challenge. You really have to stand out from the crowd. It's a highly competitive area to try and get money. Particularly when you start thinking about some of the typical characteristics of a VC. Some people might refer to us as being a piranha for the way that we attack companies and strip them of everything, but actually I prefer an analogy of a goldfish with attention deficit disorder. The reason for that is because we see so many opportunities, you're always struggling to grab our attention, and once you've got it, you've got to try and keep our attention. So this is the way that I have to think about any opportunities that I look at. Okay, so how does this relate to space? Well, I've explained the kind of things that a VC has to deal with and the way that we have to look at the world, and actually how challenging it is to make a success of fund by having to find out 1 in 10 company, which is 1 in 1,000 at best of the things that we'll see, or we fail. So given that, all I'm interested in is finding the best businesses that I possibly can to invest in. Why on earth then would I be launching a fund that is focused on space technology? I told you to get space at some point. Well, firstly, because Star Wars is back, and space is definitely cool again. I think we can all agree that the best films in recent years have all been space-related. On a more serious note, actually, it's amazing how reliant we are on space and space data, and particularly satellites already. Every person in this room, on average, interacts with a satellite 36 times a day. From ordering up your Uber, to browsing the web, to sat-nav, to anything broadcast, transport, agri-tech, weather, you name it, we're reliant on satellites. And if you look forward to some of the macro tech trends of the next decade, everything from drones to autonomous vehicles to persistent surveillance to the Internet of Things, our reliance on these satellites is going to grow exponentially. In a moment, you'll see something remarkably similar to a slide that Connor talked you through. So I won't dwell on this too much, other than to say, historically, space has not been a friendly place for VCs to fish in. It's been primarily led by public sector funding. There have been incredibly long innovation cycles. It's tended to be quite insular, not invented here attitude. And unlike most of the other areas of technology, hasn't really interacted with other areas particularly well. For some of the reasons that the 2 previous speakers have alluded to, that has fundamentally, or is fundamentally changing as we speak, with 100x or more decrease in the economics of space, meaning that for the first time, a much wider range of people can access and look to develop satellite and space-related opportunities. We perceive this as being the equivalent to the PC moment in the 90s, low cloud computing in the noughties. So for us, we think that represents a really compelling and exciting and hitherto untapped area of potential. And we're already seeing an incredibly diverse ecosystem around these changes in space cropping up. So this chart here is just an example of some of the ways you can categorize new space, and this is just upstream. When you start adding in all of the downstream companies that Connor talked about and some of the other areas, then this is many times larger. So there's already a huge amount of innovation happening in and around the space sector. As you said, tech billionaires are already leading the charge, and if there's one thing that VCs fear more than anything else, it's the fear of missing out. So if it's good enough for Bezos and Musk, it tends to be good enough for VCs. And indeed, certainly in the US, you are already seeing some of the most traditionally successful VCs backing some new space companies. So even if you take SpaceX out of the equation, last year, space-related startups raised twice as much money as the last 3 years collectively. That's an indication of both the innovation, but also the fact that it's becoming a really attractive space for VCs to play. So, what am I doing with my new fund? So we are, as I say, fingers crossed, the end of this month, launching our new fund, which is focused on space tech, which will be at least £50 million and up to 83. We're going to be focusing on a fusion of terrestrial technology with space applications across many of the areas to do with the singularity that I'm interested in. So obviously new space, but also many of the technologies that we believe have a key role, an enabling role to play in the development of the space sector, including AI, robotics, and nanotechnology. We're backed by some of the very large space corporates. We have a key relationship with the European Space Agency, and Very excitingly, we've recently just persuaded the founder of Google Earth, who scaled Google Earth, Google Maps, and Google Local Search to billions of users at Google, to join as our partner in Silicon Valley. The kind of things that we're going to be investing in, 3 key areas. I'd love to say we're going to be investing in rocket ships. We may, but by virtue of the size of the fund, it's much more likely that we're going to be focusing on downstream primarily, as well as areas in the ecosystem. So mainly software-led businesses with the occasional hardware business as well. And although we haven't launched, we've already seen an enormous number of really exciting businesses. This chart just really gives you an indication of the range of different areas. The sizes of the circles are proportional, so a lot in all of the key areas that we'd expect to. So Earth observation and CubeSats being very prominent within that. Okay, so just before I wrap up, I just wanted to say a few comments on being a founder, which I've been twice in London. In 2000, when I was a student setting up my first business, who here has heard of a business called Zoopla? Okay, I didn't found Zoopla. I founded Zoopla 5 years before Zoopla was founded, and got the timing really badly wrong and made a huge number of mistakes. Part of those mistakes was because there wasn't an ecosystem for me and a support network to tap into. There weren't business angels, there weren't cashed out entrepreneurs, there weren't advisors, there weren't accelerators, and actually there weren't very many VCs. 15 years further on, there is a really vibrant, rich ecosystem in both Europe, more specifically in the UK, and even more specifically than that in London. We're building big, valuable businesses. We're doing more with less in Europe. The UK remains the best place in Europe, contrary to expectations around Brexit, to found companies. We dominate in terms of the number of startups and the amount of money that's raised. And London is a particularly awesome place in order to grow a company. We're almost as big in terms of the talent pool of developers as San Francisco, and have a huge number of people to draw upon. And lastly, we also have a really exciting space cluster developing in Harwell. And for those of you who haven't been down there, go down there, and if you ask really nicely, they'll let you play with the world's most powerful laser. Okay, so that's everything. Thank you.